Nick and Nora Charles, the greatest on-screen couple of the 1930s and 1940s, the Thin Man series. William Powell and Myrna Loy were arguably the greatest film co-stars of the 1930s and 1940s, and their on-screen characters were known as Nick and Nora Charles. The pair made 13 films together, 14 if you count a guest appearance in The Senator Was Indiscreet in 1947. 6 of these comedies were the Thin Man films, spanning some 13 years from beginning to end. The last of the series, Song of the Thin Man, was released in 1947, making this movie series the longest-running major film series in the studio era. For the most part, the sequels followed the same familiar pattern of the first film. Nick Charles, played by William Powell, always declines to take the case at first, and Nora, played by Myrna Loy, always wants him to. There's always a nightclub sequence, there's always a tough guy, there's always a beautiful girl that's a counterpoint to Myrna Loy. For example, Muriel Hutchinson in the third film, Stella Adler in the fourth, and even Gloria Graham in the last. And then, of course, there's the end, where all the suspects are gathered in the room together, and William Powell proceeds with the identification of the killer. After the Thin Man, released in 1937, may be the best of all the films. The director was the same director that did the original film, and the writers were the same writers that did the original. It was a longer and more expensive version than the original, and it was more surprising because the normal good guy, Jimmy Stewart, turns out to be the bad guy in one of his rare villain roles. I'm sure it was a big surprise to audiences at the time. Nick and Nora Charles, the characters in the Thin Man series, were beloved. They didn't have to say any words at all. They could just look at each other, and audiences raged with internal or external laughter. For example, in the film After the Thin Man, they've returned from New York to their posh San Francisco home, only to find a noisy, crazy party going on at their place with a bunch of strangers they didn't invite. In order to get to the kitchen and find their servants, they decide to dance their way through the throng of house guests. It's their way of creating this beautiful moment in the midst of chaos and uncertainty that is their signature storyline. Audiences relished these films probably because they wished that their lives could be as interesting and carefree as Nick and Nora. Myrna Loy always plays the cheerful, happy-go-lucky part, who seems unimpressed at anything that's happening. For example, in After the Thin Man, they go into the Lie She Club, the hot spot of the film, and they move from place to place, going from the door to the check room to the crowded floor and to their table. And as they move around, people are commenting. Some of them are even making threatening statements about Nick. Nora hears all of this. Nick is watching her with amusement, but she refuses to acknowledge that anything amiss is going on. Her joyful banter in the midst of impending danger makes each of the Thin Man films a rollicking adventure. The ending of After the Thin Man has this memorable scene on the coast-to-coast train returning from their detective success. There's a big surprise. Nora is pregnant. The clues are obvious, but he is not catching on. She is knitting a baby booty, giving Nick his first clue, and then she blurts out, "And you call yourself a detective?"
What's that? Looks like a baby's sock.
And you call yourself a detective?
Why, Mrs. Charles.
Then there's the way Nora ignores Nick. For example, when they're driving in an open convertible over the Golden Gate Bridge in Shadow of the Thin Man, the fourth film in the series, Nick is driving, singing off-key to himself. Nora just looks straight ahead, pretending nothing is wrong. A motorcycle cop stops them on the bridge for speeding. Nora continues looking straight ahead, pretending nothing is happening. The cop recognizes him as the famous detective Nick Charles. Once again, Nora is still looking straight ahead, but now is smiling. It's her delight that dominates the scene, but she doesn't give any of the pleasure to Nick, or even acknowledge that he exists. She just keeps it all for herself. At the end, she chides him with a, "You now feel it in the pocketbook, don't you?" comment. Then there is the baby who we see grow up and turn into a toddler and then into a child. In the film, Another Thin Man, 1939, there's some funny baby jokes. Then there's the wonderful baby party with mothers and their babies. Nick has a great time showing off all the babies, even the ones that are not his own. In the next film, Shadow of the Thin Man, 1941, the baby is able to read lines and participate in some cute scenes with Mum and Dad. Also comes in this film the introduction of the beautiful Stella Adler, the blonde beauty. In the final film, Song of the Thin Man, 1947, the child is lecturing his parents about getting home late past their bedtime and chastising them for not spending more time with him at home. The final image of the series shows the child in his bed with their dog, Asta. In the 1930s and 1940s, there were other famous couples in movies, for example, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, and Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland, to name a few. Some of these couples might have been more dazzling or some even more talented, but none had the longevity and overall movie success that William Powell and Myrna Loy had. Astaire and Rogers made 10 films together and would be the obvious competitor to this question. Nick and Nora Charles were the most successful on-screen characters in the 1930s and 1940s, and the string of hits from William Powell and Myrna Loy continued in movie after movie as audiences roared their constant approval. Myrna Loy once said of her relationship with William Powell, "I never enjoyed my work more than when I worked with William Powell. He was a brilliant actor, a delightful companion, a great friend, and above all, a true gentleman."